Hello and welcome to Rushing the Field, weekly national college football show from NBC Sports. He's Joshua Perry. I'm Nicole Auerbach. We're glad you're here. If you like our show, please subscribe, rate, and review us. And we got to get into it because we have passed the midseason point of the season, Joshua. How did the season go so fast? It's already week 8.
It does it every year. It's really sad, honestly. There's so much anticipation that builds into the season. And then once you get there, it flies by you.
Seriously, although I guess December and January we'll have a lot more football than usual with so many playoff games. And of course, our favorites, the Pop-Tarts Bowl and all the other fun ones as well. But let's get into it. We got a lot of injury news this week. So we'll start the ticket stub, your point of entry to the pod there with probably one of the most well-known injured players of the last couple of seasons. Utah quarterback Cam Rising. He is officially out for the year. We saw him come back and play a little bit against Arizona State. Injured himself again and just was a shell of himself as a former player. Kyle Whittingham's head coach said that he has been a great leader, a great player, and he will be missed. Any future developments concerning his collegiate eligibility will be addressed at a later date, which means, yes, he could get a medical redshirt and have an 8th season.
I don't like it. Cam Rising, it's been fun watching you. It's been fun covering you. You got to get out into the real world like me and Nicole. It's time to get a real job. It's time. It is time. It's crazy. The 8th year would be absolutely wild. Here's the thing about it, though. I will say this. I had high expectations for Cam Rising. Last couple of years, he hasn't really looked like himself. But I do think that you could draw a direct line of like the last few years of Utah football and their amount of success and Cam Rising and how well he's played. And so I know Kyle Whittingham probably was like depending on him to come back full strength, look good. Certainly hasn't happened. I think it's changed all of our views about that team in the Big 12 race. But also it's time to go, baby. Pack it up. Pack it up.
Time to get a job, off your parents' insurance. Time to enter the real world like us, unfortunately, Cam, unless there's like a 50th degree or something that you can earn from the University of Utah.
It's crazy. But yeah. He is about to get kicked off his parents' insurance. Like he's that old now.
Yes, he is. Yeah. We do have a 9th year player this year, so it's not completely unprecedented. Shout out to
it's something about the Cams. It's something about the Cams.
Yeah. The Cams. Cam McCormick at Miami, of course. So just to close the loop on that, Isaac Wilson, true freshman, younger brother of Zach Wilson, who is playing for the Broncos right now. He will be the starting quarterback for Utah. I've kind of written them off in the Big 12 race, but we'll see how they respond. Positive injury news elsewhere in the conference. Travis Hunter expected back for Colorado this weekend, per Deion Sanders. They play at Arizona this weekend. So that's good for the Heisman hopeful.
Yes, it is. It's good for Colorado too. Once again, like a team that's not, completely out of some of their goals that they probably set out for at the beginning of the year. And it's good for college football. Travis Hunter is right there in the Heisman discussion, like probably next to Ashton Jeanty, if you're really looking at this thing the right way. And so as much of him as we get to see is a positive, but also for him, like putting together a strong close to the season could do a ton in terms of the Heisman race. So I love it. I'm glad he's not like super banged up. I'm actually shocked that he's like able to play the way that he is. I say it every time. A lot of reps for this guy. So Iron Man, we should respect it, but good for us to see it.
Yeah, before he got injured last week, he was averaging, I think, 132 snaps per game per PFF, which is just wild. But Joshua, did I hear you say that Ashton Jeanty is the correct favorite for the Heisman? Do we agree here at the midseason?
We agree at the midseason. Yes, we do.
Okay. All right. So Ashton Jeanty, the Boise State running back, who's he's within striking distance of Barry Sanders' single season record, which is crazy.
If he was his own team, he would be like top 20 in rushing yards per game. Like we got to talk about it. Like it's ridiculous what he's doing. If he was a team, he would be top whatever in rushing touchdowns this season. Like just what he's done production wise is stupid.
There was I've been seeing graphics. They first started out by being like, here are, the teams that Ashton Jeanty has like rushed for more yards single-handedly then. And then there were so many that it now became a list of like the only teams that he hasn't outrushed. Like it's pretty crazy. He's averaging 9.9 yards per carry still.
It is 10 yards per carry is just wild. Like, hand them the ball, it's a first down. Like, that's the offense right there.
Yeah, it is. We'll get into some of these other kind of midseason observations as we go today. Last bit of news as we're recording here Wednesday morning, the NCAA football playing rules committee might close the loophole that was used by Oregon with the 12 men on the field penalty at the end of the game, that it ran clock. So basically what they could do, I was speaking with folks involved in this decision on Tuesday, is they can create a rules interpretation. They can kind of blast it out. It would probably go public to the media as well because of how much attention this got since Saturday night. But the idea would be like, you're not supposed to advantage yourself by committing a penalty on purpose. They don't want to incentivize that. So they can use other areas where they've tweaked rules or interpretations to basically just say you would get the 5-yard penalty, but you would re-snap and you wouldn't have the time come off the clock, which would obviously have people stop doing this. What Dan Lanning and company did, and he like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, said that they did it on purpose afterwards when he was asked, was they, had a 12th man come out, ran a few seconds off the clock, and then Ohio State only got one play left. And we saw, Will Howard run it and run out of time. So it's possible that this loophole gets closed so that other coaches don't try to do this moving forward. But it was legal. Dan Lanning and Oregon did it. If it was on purpose, it was legal and it was ruled correctly. They just might tweak this to avoid incentivizing it.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because we see other penalties that teams commit to give themselves an advantage. Like we've, delay of game, for example, is one. And, I guess you could just decline whatever the case is, but it's something that we see. I know that there are teams that are coached, like if you're in really bad position and the other team's probably going to score a touchdown if the ball goes over your head, just tackle the receiver, right? And we see that in it's a big penalty, but these are things people do to that takes points off the board potentially. And so I get the thought process. I also understand this happens in other parts of the game. I'll put it like this though. Why not just leave it? Because I'm not exactly sure that this thing is what Dan Lanning did was so simple and so easy and so recognizable that everybody else gets to pull it off and it works for them. Because there are multiple things that could have happened. Let's say Ohio State drops back, try to throw a quick screen, nobody's open, dirts the ball, 2 seconds, come off the clock. Now you're sitting there 5 yards closer. There's 8 seconds on the clock. So now you're in territory where you probably can run 2 good plays, right? That's a bad outcome for Oregon. Ohio State, of course, could have had a successful play. And then people are asking Dan Lanning in the post game, what was the 12 men about? He can't do the smirk because you might have lost. And it's not fun to smirk when you lose. There are so many outcomes that could have probably gone against Oregon. You had to be in a perfect spot where the yardage didn't matter. It was more valuable there. The time was more valuable than the yardage. I like it. I think we should keep it. It gives us the opportunity for more coaches to try it and screw it up, and I'm totally here for it.
This is something that we see all the time, right? One coach maybe finds a loophole and then everybody else decides to try to do it and it doesn't always work. The example that was brought up to me was Kenny Pickett fake slide, which was an iconic moment, right? Genius. And they immediately interpreted the rule and changed it so that people don't do that for safety reasons. So we will see what happens with that. And it might, you would think that there would be some resolution on this before games kick off this weekend.
You would hope if that's what they want to do, that there would be a resolution there. I'm just going to be on the record as saying, let's not do it. Let's let this ride and see what kind of chaos it can create as we move throughout the season. All right, but now it's time for us to get to a little stock up, stock down, and we're going to start with Oregon in the stock up section here. Nicole, obviously that huge win at home. I know people that traveled out to Autzen. They said it was one of the all-time environments that they had ever been a part of. But here we are. The Ducks now the number 2 team in the country. Dylan Gabriel kind of reopened that Heisman campaign. You had talked about him as a Heisman Trophy winner at the beginning of the year, and Oregon really in the driver's seat of the Big Ten race now.
They are certainly for getting to the Big Ten championship game, for a playoff spot, right? The wiggle room that you now have, and just that path again to a top 4 seed as the Big Ten champion with your path clear to Indianapolis as well. So yeah, huge game For Oregon, we've talked about it all week, but I just continue to harp on the idea of what it meant for Dan Lanning, right? This was someone who, could have been in the mix for the A&M job, Alabama, anything that opened, right? I mean, he is exactly the prototype of a head coach that I would want running my program in 2024, with the way he recruits, the style of play, the way he embraces NIL and the player relationships. And instead he says, nope, I'm staying. I want to win a national championship at Oregon, and I believe I can do it. And then he gets a top 5 win for the very first time in program history. Like, that is what a signature win means. And it meant a lot to Oregon. So, outside of the playoff race, I just think, like, for the history of this program, it is an all-time moment and just really big, especially after you've had a couple coaches kind of use Oregon as a stepping stone, right? And you have a guy who says, this is it, and we can do it here, and then backs it up and gets a win like that. So just awesome for the Ducks, and clear path the rest of the way.
Yeah, no, I like what you said about Dan Lanning in terms of the way that he views that job. And I do think part of the difference now, too, in the NIL era, like, having the backing of Nike is probably a really good thing to view that as a more sustainable job. Now that Oregon is a Big Ten school and you are in some of these primetime windows and the visibility is so good, like, this is a place where somebody would desire to be. And Dan Lanning, absolutely, with the opportunity to win a title there. It was an interesting game for this because I think the narrative has changed on him. But he has not changed himself. And I say that to say he coaches in a way that gives you heartburn.
Yes.
I personally love it. We talk about it. If I was, it'd be the reason I couldn't be a coach. I would coach exactly like that, and it wouldn't work out for me. But take the risk.
The fourth down decisions, the going for 2 at odd points. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do the unpopular things, gain the advantage. There was the 4th down where I'm saying, 4th and 1 late in the game, they're like, oh, run it, you get the first down. I'm like, he should throw it. Just like mentally, if he throws it, Ohio State is going to be like, oh my gosh. And they did. And they completed it. And it was a first down. And a lot of bad things could have happened, but they didn't. That's what I like about Dan Lanning. He goes for it every time.
Yeah, and again, that would be really fun to play in. I feel like, Joshua, you'd be one of those guys running around the field like him afterwards, where it was like, does he want to headbutt somebody? Does he want to hug somebody? Like, he was so amped. But yeah, just really cool moment. And you're right about that style of play, the aggressiveness that cost him against Washington twice last year. And that comes through and gets them the win. So really big win for the Ducks and Dylan Gabriel, who's now, I think, 2nd in Heisman odds per bet MGM behind Ashton Genty. So it's really big, but it wasn't the only big game and big win in the Big Ten last weekend. This game went down to overtime. Penn State comes all the way back against USC and picks up a win that James Franklin does not always get. He does not always win 1-score games. In fact, they've really struggled with them the last handful of times that Penn State's been in them. And Drew Aller and company, Tyler Warren, who like played a million different positions and had a million yards in this game, they get Penn State this win. Does it change the way that you think about them, this team, this season? Or what they can be? Does this have more to say about USC? Like, how do you make sense of what we saw at the Coliseum?
I don't make sense of it, I guess is the best way to put it out there. Like, I'm still, and Penn State fans they literally hate me at this point. I'm still not sold. I am not there on Penn State quite yet. But I do know that USC is an extremely flawed team. And it's funny because I talk to people and they're like, oh man, USC just is they're sitting here at 500 or wherever the case is, they could be undefeated. And I'm like, yes, but there's a reason why they're not. And it's because they have like glaring flaws as a ball team. And so I look at Penn State, like Tyler Warren, you're right, bona fide NFL player. I think that he is phenomenal. He's snapping the ball, he's catching the ball, he's blocking, he's running the ball, he's throwing the ball, right? Like there's not much more that he could do offensively for his team. He's great. Outside of that, like they don't just run it at people like physically just down their face, and they've got 2 really good running backs. I asked the question, why? Where are the wide receivers at? Thought that was a better unit. I'm not sure that it's a better unit than it was last year. And they take the ball out of Drew Aller's hands at weird times in the game, like Tyler Warren going in there at quarterback or Bo Prabula to get different looks. it feels like a gimmick to me. And I ask the question, is it a gimmick because it has to be or because they want it to be? But I want to know that because it's really hard for me to say that the number 3 team in the country should feel like a gimmick.
For the record, I put them in the stock up, even though this sounds like a stock down. I think that it's a big win for Penn State. And to me, I think it changes a little bit of the ceiling that I think, because not that USC is going to make the playoff or anything, or that they're on the caliber of Ohio State, like the types of teams that Penn State hasn't been able to beat regularly. But that was a game that we have seen the Nittany Lions lose. They were down big in this game. We'll get to it in a second because we've got USC in the stock down conversation. So we'll talk about what they did to allow Penn State back in this game. But just it's a big win, and it's one of those, the new Big Ten, where you get games like this as a conference games. You have to go and travel, go play at the Coliseum. Still really big. Last team for stock up, though. We'll see what Joshua decides to criticize them for. It's Iowa State.
You're a hater. I'm a hater, really. But you're a hater. You hate on my hate. That's the real problem.
That's true, but your hate is so easy to hate on. Okay, let's talk about the Cyclones. They are 6-0 for the first time since 1938, which is a very long time ago. And I think that we maybe had put them in the category of a Big 12 contender in the preseason, or maybe we didn't, because Matt Campbell's best teams tend to be the ones that we don't have high expectations for. The defense has been really good, especially in the second half of games, because they trailed in some of these games early. Really the only issue defensively is that they just struggle to get off the field on third downs, but very solid team. And they're tied with BYU and Texas Tech atop the Big 12 standings, which I'm not sure anyone saw coming in the preseason. But shout out to Iowa State. I mean, I think that they are kind of getting lost in the shuffle, and they deserve some spotlight.
I'm high on them right now. And I think it's because Campbell is a good coach. And I know, like, he was at one point like the hottest coaching candidate in college football. And then the shine kind of wore off, but he's still a good ball coach. And so these are the types of results that you can get with him. To that point, I trust their defense a ton. It has brought them back into games they probably shouldn't have been in. It has allowed them to pull away in games that, maybe they – offensively, it's like, I don't know if they should pull away, but the defense has given them chances to do so. And that's why I kind of trust them to win the Big 12. Like, I think this is a team that has a known identity. You know how much I value that in the sport of college football, because crazy sport. And so, yeah, this is a big deal. And I do think that the arrow should be pointing up on Iowa State.
All right, let's flip it over. Arrow pointing down. Like I said, we'll get to USC in just a second, but we've got to start with Ole Miss, who lost a game to a team that did not lead at any point in the game. Literally, LSU had the lead for 0 seconds. Yeah. They beat Ole Miss in overtime in a game where Jackson Dart is sitting at the podium afterwards saying, I don't know how we lost that game. Incredible play by Garrett Nussmeier late to force overtime, like really gutsy for LSU. It's really hard to win at Tiger Stadium, especially at a night game. But Ole Miss now has 2 losses. They lose to Kentucky, they lose to LSU. I know we're not supposed to write off 2-loss teams because we don't know. It's our first year of the 12-team playoff. We don't know if 3-loss teams make it. But they just don't have much left on their schedule to offset these losses, to have signature wins. And it just does not look or feel like a playoff team. And I just think that is wildly disappointing for a team that went all in, went into the portal, was trying to address their needs, was trying to prove that they could be tougher and they could win games like this and they could make the college football playoff in year 1. And here we are mid-October, and it feels like that goal is already gone.
It's so intriguing to watch because of all the inputs that you said. Like, it was the reason I felt very strongly about them to start the year. Is it seemed like they could have a more physical identity, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. I'm a big Jackson Dart fan. I had him as a Heisman Trophy winner, and it doesn't look like that is going to happen. But this is kind of the Lane Kiffin experience as well, right? Like, you have all the things that set up. You did the offseason right, to your point. look at the schedule at the beginning of the year. You say it's favorable enough that they can avoid some of these like crazy clashes. And if they do that, they're probably skating into the college football playoff, and they don't. I'll just ask this question. It's like being cheeky here, but the Big Ten, the SEC talked about kind of like the scheduling pact there for the beginning of the year. Like, wouldn't it be fun to watch like Ryan Day and Lane Kiffin like in a game, right? Ohio State, Ole Miss, because the expensive rosters, the expectations that were there, and this idea of I don't know if either one of these coaches is going to be able to pull it off. Well, one of them's got to win the game. And I feel like they're in a very similar spot just in terms of like narrative and can you actually win the ones you need to win?
Yeah, it's funny that Penn State and Ole Miss played in the bowl game last year. And I feel like that was like very much the storyline of like, hey, a top 10 win. Like these are the types of wins these programs like need to do to get to the next step. So very similar. Let's talk about Alabama. We actually have, I thought about putting Tennessee in here as well because they're about to play each other. So we'll get there because we're going to preview the third Saturday in October in just a little bit as well. But Alabama has basically now for 10 quarters not played great football. They, we saw the way that Georgia came back in that game. We saw the loss to Vandy in a game that they were outplayed. And then they could have and maybe should have lost to South Carolina. They escaped with a 2-point win. Jalen Milroe's now thrown 4 interceptions in the past 3 games. And at least one in the South Carolina game was just not a good interception. Like it's really inexplicable. And the defense has been getting gashed, getting beat. Obviously we saw what happened with Vanderbilt where they completed converted 2/3 of their third downs. Wasn't quite as bad against South Carolina, but still they were able to move the ball. They were able to move the ball late to try to get a chance to win the game at the end too. I don't feel great about Alabama right now. I know they only have 1 loss. I know they're one of the best wins in the country, but it does not seem to be trending in a great direction right now. Maybe a Tennessee game changes that, but right now it's just like a little bit uncomfortable, I would think, for Kalen DeBoer in Tuscaloosa.
The Tennessee game changes that probably for the minds of Alabama supporters. For me, as somebody who's just kind of watching the big picture, the arrow's down on Tennessee as well, right? So like it is this weird spot for Alabama, and I think it's important like to win a game like they did against South Carolina because it could have been a repeat of what we saw against Vanderbilt, and it does feel like this is a more chaotic year than what we've seen in the past. However, standard is the standard. Right, Jalen Milroe, he had his Heisman moment against Georgia. Now it looks very different than what we thought it was going to be. This defense is different. It's young. Now it's starting to get banged up, and they've got an offensive head coach now instead of a defensive head coach. Like things are different down there. I'm curious to see what the finish is like, though, because it's going to have a lot to say about the confidence of that fans have in Kalen DeBoer as they move forward. It's a wild place that they're in right now where they put the side-by-side of Nick Saban screaming at the officials in a blowout game and Kalen DeBoer kind of like smile on his face and the game is too close against a team they should be beating. Like those are the things that he's going to have to try to avoid down the stretch.
Right. And I personally think that stuff's unfair.
It's unfair, but like these are, you got to win the right way at a place like Alabama. Like it's unfortunate, but this is what they have to deal with.
It's true. And I think like we've talked a lot about following a legend in terms of like the pressure of that, but it's almost like I personally underrated like coming into a situation where the standard and expectations are so high where they don't expect 2 shaky performances in a row. They don't expect, again, like you said, a smile after a 2-point win over an SEC opponent, no matter who it is. But just like sort of the things that, they're just so used to that we're spoiled by because that team never rebuilt. That program never rebuilt. They just reloaded every single year, no matter, what players left, what staff left. So it's just an insanely high bar to clear on a regular basis. Will be fascinating to see how Kalen DeBoer handles all of this. I think he's got a really good head on his shoulders. He's won a ton of games in a lot of places, but this is totally uncharted territory for him.
Yes, it is.
Let's talk about the last team for the stock down. You gave us a preview, an appetizer of your take on USC a little bit earlier. 8 losses in the last 13 games for Lincoln Riley. The 3 losses this year that you mentioned that some people are like, hey, they could easily be undefeated. It's because they had leads late in these games, but they lose to Michigan. Then they lose to Minnesota. They lose to Penn State in overtime after they were up 14 at the half. What is going on with the Trojans?
Like I said earlier, they've got some really glaring flaws. First off, I think their defense certainly is better, but it's not a good defense yet. And I thought that was going to take some time. So I don't want to hold it against them that they haven't flipped that side of the ball in just one season. But what I do want to hold against Lincoln Riley is that it took them so damn long to find a new defensive coordinator, right? Like we still shouldn't be going through this experience there with USC. Their offensive line is also like, it was Jekyll and Hyde with them. They have found ways to get Miller Moss abused this year. In the first half against Pennsylvania State, they also found ways to run it with extreme success. That unit is extremely inconsistent, and it hurts them a ton. Those would be the 2 biggest issues for me. But then I start to look at the head coach, and I've made this comment before. He feels like a glorified OC or a glorified quarterback coach at times. It always seems like there's something missing when it comes to the Lincoln Riley experience. Even when the teams were great, it always felt like the defense is a problem or, can't close out games, whatever the case is. And now he doesn't have the luxury of hiding behind a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. Like, we're kind of getting the full Lincoln Riley experience right now, and it's not very pleasurable. Last thing I'll say, 8 losses in the last 13 games, right, for Lincoln Riley. Clay Helton's worst stretch was 8 losses in 13 games. This is the people are making the comps. I don't necessarily think it's the most fair thing in the world to do, but you got a $10 million coach. And I think naturally folks are going to be like, what is he doing better than the last guy? And the win-loss record is not something he's doing better.
Right. And I think too, the way that like the second half of the season went last year, the free fall, when you had a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback, all of these types of performances and kind of the underperforming, it just reminds people that Lincoln Riley didn't do more with what he's had offensively. And I think that always becomes glaring. Now, let's move into WTF on RTF, because this is something that we enjoyed in the green room on Saturday as it was happening. But it's also very much tied to someone who loves Lincoln Riley and has defended Lincoln Riley ever since he's been hired at USC. So Colin Cowherd, he went to the USC Penn State game and decided to post a very celebratory selfie video at halftime when, to be fair, the Trojans did lead 20-6 against the Nittany Lions. Let's listen now.
Some of you guys are going to owe Lincoln Riley an apology. I don't know if these Big Ten teams can handle coming out west, the sunshine, the distractions of LA. Probably not. Look at the halftime score. I'm at Cosm. Oh, they're in a commercial. Whatever. I don't hold grudges. Apologies accepted.
So the best part is he never acknowledged this. Like, obviously they lost the game. Penn State came all the way back, won in overtime.
And that video is still up?
Still up, never deleted. And there was never like a follow-up video posted acknowledging that maybe it's time for him to make an apology. But that was just so fun. I think I like the sunshine, but there was just a lot of really good enunciation in that video.
Yeah, it was, I get where he was at for sure. It's crazy to post that video. I love when he panned over to show the score and he said, "Oh, we're in commercial," which cracked me up. And then we were sitting there after the game and it's like, oh man, he's got plenty of time to delete this. Like, you can still delete it. And we're sitting here on a Wednesday as we record it. You have plenty of time. You can still delete this. And he just doesn't.
Nope. Which I do respect, but you could have gotten more content out of making content about how wrong you were in your previous content. Just saying.
Yeah, well, this is actually, it's like content inception. It is fantastic. Neither here nor there. All right, you want to get to some picks and previews here?
Yes.
Yeah, we got some good games. It feels like every weekend we get to say that we've actually got like pretty good games to talk about. So this will be exciting. I mean, probably biggest game nationally is Georgia at Texas. We're talking about number 5 taking on number 1 Texas, 3.5-point favorite in that one, over under 55.5. Georgia, I'll start by saying this. Georgia, I think, has looked very different than what I thought they were going to look like. Offensively, have really struggled to find like super game-changing guys. And they're a little bit banged up at this point. Now they're taking on a Texas team that I think offensively we have no questions. My only question about them is, could they be similar to my Ohio State Buckeyes, where the number 1 defensive ranking was because they played a bunch of offenses that aren't very good? Like that's the only thing where I would say there's a question. But here we are with number 5 taking on number 1. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah. So first, I'm totally with you on like the schedule. And this is why people added teams like Texas and OU to the SEC and Oregon and USC and these types of teams to the Big Ten. We get games like these and they're league games. We didn't have to schedule this 10 years ago and hope that it comes out and they're both in the top 5. So that part is great. It's our 3rd top 5 game of the season so far. We're only in week 8, but I am also concerned about Georgia. And I just think they're not as sound on both sides of the ball as we're used to seeing. They're not as reliable offensively that we're used to seeing. We're used to seeing Georgia teams that could just always run the ball. And right now, they've not had a single 100-yard rusher in any game. And that includes their game against Mississippi State last week, where that's the worst rush defense in the entire SEC. And that game was closer than it should have been. Like, it feels like they've had a lot of that. I still think coming out of that game against Alabama, another top 5 game, felt better about Georgia than I did Alabama because of the way they came back, because of what we saw from Carson Beck. So I'm not worried if they fall behind in this game. I don't know that they have the weapons like Texas does. And they don't have the Brock Bowers. They don't have Ladd McConkey to just help them get out of something, or when they need a massive play, just find those guys. Right. Defensively, we saw Jalen Milroe and what Alabama did in the first half against that defense, where, again, they adapted, they figured things out. Kirby Smart is a great defensive mind, but they were scoring touchdowns on basically every possession.
Yep.
Texas could do that, right? Quinn Ewers, super experienced, one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He's a little rusty at the beginning of last week's game, but he's still, when he's playing well, it's a Heisman caliber quarterback. They can run the ball, even though they've had injuries to that position in the preseason. They've got guys he can throw to. They've got a defense that I actually would like to learn more about. This is the one thing, Joshua, I'd be curious your thoughts on this. So Texas's defense statistically is one of the best in the country. Yeah. It looks great. When we've seen them, they're blowing people out. They're holding these teams to basically nothing. But it sounds better than it actually is, because they've gone up against Michigan and Oklahoma, which sound like big wins, but those are anemic offenses.
Yes,
bad offenses. They cannot move the ball. So I wonder if we don't actually know how good Texas defense is.
That's where I'm at with this Texas team. Is my biggest question about them. I truly cannot discern how good or bad their defense is because of the competition. And we've been fooled by teams who have stifled really bad offenses. And then they get up against a team that even just has like a higher quality of athlete, not even necessarily like a great offense. And they start to look different. The reality is, I think this year has really come down to like, who do I trust more, or what do I trust more kind of exercise. And I think, which is crazy to say because Kirby's got a couple of trophies there, I think I trust Texas a little bit more at this point. And so I'm going to take them to cover in this game.
I will as well. I kind of feel like Texas is what Georgia usually is, which is also weird to say. But I trust that offense. And we say this all the time, but it's worth repeating because it's so hard to have quarterback depth with quality these days. But nobody's got a better quarterback room and quarterback situation than Texas, regardless of what happens. If Quinn Ewers gets banged up again, whatever it is, you've got now Arch with a couple starts under his belt as well. So I will also take Texas. All right, let's talk about the third Saturday in October. Alabama favored by 3 points. They're going to Knoxville to take on Tennessee. Over under in this game, 56.5 points. And listen, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Joshua, you could talk about this as a player. Like, coming into a rivalry game, both teams not playing well, but this is the kind of win that could turn things around. Does that help? Does it hurt to be coming in kind of limping into this game? I mean, neither team is playing very well, particularly offensively. Nico Iamaleava has really been not playing well. He's coming off his worst game, actually, as a starter. Is that a good time to get a big game and to have Alabama come to town in Kalen DeBoer's first game in this rivalry? I don't know.
I don't think it's a good thing to come into the game in the shape that either one of these teams is coming in. Like it's such a weird thing because I feel like the game script lines up for what either team has been struggling with as of late. For example, Alabama defense doesn't look like the Alabama defense. Well, for Tennessee, you probably feel good about that because their offense has not looked like a Tennessee offense. I mean, this thing it's been a struggle for them to get the ball up and down the field the last couple of weeks. Now, I do think that if Tennessee's defense continues to kind of expose itself as a defense that can give up yards and give up plays the way it has, last couple of weeks, and Alabama certainly has an edge in this one. I don't know. I'll put it like this. I've never been in on the Josh Heupel experience, and I kind of got fooled there early on in the year about, how much of a team effort this thing is. I do think that there are some pimples on either side of the ball, but like there's a chance for me that this defense can get exposed. And at least for Alabama, for all the problems that they do have, the one thing I know is that Jalen Milroe can do that one thing where, he just makes people look like he's playing a video game. And I trust him to get that done.
Yeah, I also am a little concerned about Josh Heupel offense. I mean, but again, with Hendon Hooker, they were able to do all sorts of crazy things. But you know who else he had on that roster? Jalen Hyatt. There's no Jalen Hyatt on this roster. And I think that's part of it. But Nico's also missed throws, had some bad ones. He's missed guys. He, a few weeks ago, right, he, doesn't get the ball into the end zone when you need to at the end of the game to try to give yourself a chance to win against Arkansas. So it is an interesting time to have these two teams meet. These are also coaches who are both from South Dakota and have known each other for a really long time. There's actually a great story in the Knoxville News Sentinel about how Kalen DeBoer would visit with Josh Heupel early in their career to learn his offense. And obviously now you're like, well, everything's changed and people tweak and whatever. But, two South Dakota guys helping each other. And there should be some familiarity in the style of play that they have. So I really don't know who I'm taking in this game. Am I taking Alabama? 3 points on the road? I think I am.
I think I am. Just a couple multimillionaires from South Dakota. How about that?
Yeah, you could probably buy half the state with these salaries.
All right, you want to get to this final preview here. Great one, the Big Ten going down. Nebraska at Indiana, the number 16 Indiana Hoosiers. All right, put some respect on their name. Indiana's favored by 6.5 in this one. Over under is 50.5 points. I mean, I think there are a lot of intriguing storylines to this. Of course, one team that was expected to take a big step, there's a surprise team in here, but I think two teams that have played some very good football, so this should be a competitive game. But the quarterbacks, to me, have both been very impressive. Dylan Raiola, year one, freshman year, he comes in, he's been efficient now. Had a couple performances lately where I do think people have figured him out, but you can see the talent. You can see the command of the offense. And then here's Curtis Rourke, a guy who comes from the MAC. He's a Canadian dude, maybe not the biggest name. And outside of Dylan Gabriel and that performance he just had, I think he's played the best quarterback. He's had the best quarterback play in the Big Ten so far. What are you seeing in this one?
Yeah, I also would start with the quarterbacks. Dylan Raiola comes to Nebraska, wants to help them get back to national prominence. Worth pointing out right now, they're at the 5-win threshold. They've matched how many wins they had last year in Matt Rule's first season. A lot of winnable games here ahead. But this one's important because I've been saying since the preseason that Nebraska would be bowl eligible by Halloween. So this was one that I thought I thought on paper would be a lot more winnable than it looks like now because Indiana is playing so well. With you on Curtis Rourke, I honestly put him he's on Heisman lists now. I mean, he's playing that well. Indiana's offense is one of the best and most prolific in the country this year. Very sound team. We talked to Curt Cignetti last week on Rushing the Field, and you can go back into our archive and find that interview. Really interesting the way that he's built this, the way that he imported so much from JMU to set a foundation from player standpoint. A lot of group of 5 transfers that are doing this at the Big Ten level, which is really cool. Well-coached team, very sound. This is a coach who, we Googled him, he wins, but he really does win at every level he's coached at. And this will be an interesting experience for them. They're 6-0 for just the second time in program history. They had a bye. So now it's been 2 weeks of everyone telling them how awesome it is that Indiana football is good, patting them on the back. Can they take care of business? I think they will. I think the location of this game is also what gives me an edge for the Hoosiers. I think they're going to get to 7-0. And I do think they're going to cover the 6.5 points against Nebraska, which is coming off of Raiola's probably his worst game of the season.
Yeah, it's I'm curious if Tony White has any answers for a guy in Curtis Rourke. And for all of the great things Indiana's done, I think their offensive line is gettable. It's not a super deep unit. Like, I think that they could come up with maybe more scheme than anything to try to put those guys in a bind. But they spread the ball around. A lot of guys have been productive within that offense. I do think it's certainly a tough matchup there. I am leaning with Windiana as well. I really do think they are a legitimately good football team. Like, this wasn't just a great first half story. Like, they play a really good brand of football, and I'm buying in, man. Let's go Windiana.
We've got the shirts. My shirt finally came, by the way, Joshua. My Cignetti Marlboro t-shirt. Yes, I have it. So we're all in. This is a program that's actually never won 10 games in a single season. They've gotten to 9 when Indiana.
Yeah, they got close. That was when Penix was there.
Yeah, Penix. Yeah. But they've got a really good chance to do it this year. So it's going to be fun to watch.
I'll say this last thing, not to cut you off, but they've got Ohio State, Michigan. They've got Washington and Nebraska, as we just mentioned, left on the schedule. They've got Washington, Nebraska, and Michigan at home.
Okay.
So
I think they'll be favored in all of those games.
That's kind of what I'm getting at. And then they play Ohio State the week before Ohio State plays Michigan. That's like a classic look-ahead spot. So, I mean, if we're just trying to create narratives in our brain about Indiana being undefeated, there it is.
All right. Undefeated, 10-win Indiana. We'll see where it goes. Cannot wait. And love that Nebraska-Indiana is one of the best games of the weekend. Let's talk about the best teams in the country right now. It's time for our power rankings presented by Citi. Listen, it is the midseason, so we're just going straight power rankings. We are ranking the best teams in the country right now. This doesn't quite match the AP poll, but this is how I see it right now. Texas number 1, Oregon number 2, Ohio State number 3, didn't drop them after losing the 2-3 game. I still think they're one of the best teams in the country. Georgia at 4, Penn State at 5. I will say 4 and 5 was a tough decision because Penn State's unbeaten, but I don't know, for some of the reasons you outlined a little earlier, Joshua, about just like what their ceiling is this season. But it's a fair argument to have about the number 1 spot too. I saw a lot of people who are very mixed on this because Oregon has the best win in the country now, but Texas has been so dominant and does look like so well-rounded that I kept them in the top spot.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And like, just in terms of the AP poll, I kind of hate the way that polling works and how they move teams around based off of the results. Like, it's mind-boggling to me, neither here nor there. I have no problem with Texas in that number 1 spot. I do think Oregon has an extremely strong case based off of the result against Ohio State. I think that there are other people that will say, well, it's hard for me to do that when I watched what Oregon looked like at the beginning of the season. And even though they do have the best win, it was just a 1-point win. Right, like you have that back and forth there, and I get it. I don't necessarily agree with all of it, but I understand it. So 1, 2, I'm perfectly fine. You got 3 right. it's a thing that I feel like the AP does not get right. Like, just because Penn State won in a game that was, I mean, it wasn't a great win if you look at the totality of the game. And Ohio State goes on the road and loses to now what is the number 2 team in the country by 1 point. Like, I do think that you would look at that game and say that we watched 2 of the best teams in the country.
Yes.
Ohio State should be penalized, but not massively so. The Penn State-Georgia thing is fun because we talked about both of these teams already. I think they're both very flawed football teams. I think it's also very clear that there are a couple of the best teams in the country. This is a year that we're living in college football. Again, Penn State, I'm just really struggling there. So I can't argue with this, even though I do know Georgia has like some issues. I'm just not at the trust Penn State stage of the season.
But it's wild because we both just did our midseason CFP brackets as well, which you can find on NBCSports.com. It's so hard to sort through the teams that are like outside of the top 3 through like 15 to figure out, okay, who would be getting at large spots, who's better than who, because I mean, and I know we've kind of talked about the parity in college football over the last few years and the portal era, but like the top to the middle of like, let's say like the top 20, top 30 teams feels closer than it's been in other years, which it speaks to your point about like some of these teams that are ranked very highly actually have some significant flaws, feel like they could lose more frequently than maybe a top 5 team in years past, but that's kind of where we are this year.
I like it. It's a little disconcerting, honestly, because I do think that we're so used to the era of like dominant teams and no parity. And so it is weird to kind of like be on edge watching a lot of these games. I'm not even supposed to be emotionally invested in any of them, but I love the sport that much that I'm on edge. But I think it shapes up for the first year where we do have 12 teams that it should be this competitive. I would have been pissed off otherwise. And so I think that's been a nice little gift for us. All right, Nicole, you want to get this thing finished up here with some underdog picks?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I'm going to keep harping on this every week. If you are betting our picks, maybe there's not always outright winners, but we are winning you money if you're at least taking the points. And we named the show Rushing the Field. I don't want to say it's like a direct correlation, but I feel like there's like at least 5-6 field storms every single week this season. It's the craziest season since 2007. I feel like we are directly responsible for that, and you are welcome as college football fans.
And so your pick covered last week.
Yours did too, right?
Which was, it was really my pick, but you got in the rundown first. And then my secondary pick also did cover. So like we said, maybe we're not pulling off the full upset, but if you are following these picks, you are certainly making some money. All right, Nicole, what you got?
Okay. So this week I am taking Arizona State plus 3.5 at Cincinnati. I recognize that Cincinnati's had a couple nice wins this season, but I'm all in on Arizona State and Kenny Dillingham. Okay, so we saw this last week. You stayed up on Friday night to watch them beat Utah, storm the field. Listen, again, we are rushing the field, so pro that. You basically saw Kenny Dillingham get lost in the sea, in the crowd of people. He was that swept up in the win. He said this after the game. They're 5-1. Their preseason win total was 4.5. So he told everyone who made money off of betting that over to invest it in their NIL collective. Brilliant marketing by Kenny Dillingham.
I love that.
And I like this story. I mean, he inherited a really rough situation. He's one of the youngest coaches in the sport. They had the bowl ban last year. They have to go through that right at the start of the season of just knowing that there's nothing really to play for. Cam Skattebo, one of the most exciting running backs in the country that you might not be watching. And his name is Skattebo. Come on. That's just really, really fun to say. So they have no ranked teams on their schedule until mid-November. All of those are big program-wise reasons that I am riding with the Sun Devils. And I think that we talked about the Big 12 being super wide open. I think Cincinnati is in that bottom third of the conference this year. So I say Sun Devils are going to get this done on the road in Cincinnati, taking them plus 3.5 points, riding with Kenny Dillingham.
I think first off, I do think it's a great pick. Second off, you're right about this whole Kenny Dillingham, what he was up against. Like, first off, as young as he was when he took that job, it's just like, that's a lot to deal with to begin with. But you also have a program that is in like trouble, like trouble. And he took it head on, like just embrace the situation that they were in, almost like we're not going to feel bad or make excuses for what we're dealing with. And I love that. I really do, because I feel like I can appreciate the mentality. A lot of people kind of look around and they're like, oh, well, I had this set up against me, I had that. He ain't playing any of that. Those guys are balling down there. All right, so my underdog pick, I'm going with Boston College. They are a 7-point underdog. They're at Virginia Tech. First off, Thomas Castellanos is a guy who we have talked about. He is a bit of a roller coaster. Certainly will give you some exciting plays. He'll also give the football away a little bit. So I'm counting on him to not give the football away in this game. Now, going to Virginia Tech, it's a place that I actually played at in college one time. The environment is as advertised. Boston College has also been to some like pretty good road environments this year. I think they played at Florida State, at Mizzou. Yep. Like this is not a new thing to them. And I think that Bill O'Brien's going to have his team ready to go. He's a tough-minded coach. I think he's a very serious coach, a great fit for that situation. And Virginia Tech, I think they would like to be able to kind of put that notch in their belt that they could get a win over a team like that. So a little bit of vibes there, but I do think the game script could actually work out for this to happen.
I like it as well, or at least the points, even though they're on the road, because listen, we've seen Virginia Tech lose to Rutgers. We saw them lose to Vanderbilt. They were supposed to be an ACC dark horse, but they've had some clunker games that I'm sure they wish they would have taken back, but maybe they're just not as talented or as consistent as we thought they were going to be this year. So yes, Thomas Castellanos and his chaos unleashed in Blacksburg. I like the pick. We will see how our picks do once again, but let us know if you're betting any of them, because we would like to get you money. Like, that's part of why we do these underdog picks. But we'll see you next week. That'll do it for Rushing the Field. He's Joshua Perry. I'm Nicole Auerbach. More to come in a crazy college football season next week.